So Alberta's new NDP government had their throne speech. You know what that means. It's a general outline of their legislative plans for the months ahead. And of course, it's read by the Lieutenant Governor, which is the provincial delegate of the Governor General in Ottawa. So the speech is written by Rachel Notley's NDP, but given by a non-partisan representative of the Queen. That's why it's called the throne speech. Here, I want to show you a few clips from the Alberta NDP throne speech and give you my thoughts on them. Here's the first one.
We are optimistic, hopeful, entrepreneurial, remarkably diverse, and community-minded people.
You know, it's pretty tough to quarrel with that kind of a Hallmark greeting card level of banality, but even there, it's not quite true. Alberta is a very diverse entrepreneurial place, but this government isn't. It is chock full of labor union activists and public sector workers. Of course, the husband of the Premier herself is a union boss with CUPE. There are only 2 entrepreneurs in the entire NDP caucus, no one who's ever worked in oil and gas. Alberta is a very diverse place, but not the NDP caucus or cabinet. Here's the next clip.
Like freedom from poverty, freedom from violence, and freedom from discrimination because of who you love.
Now, I love the use of the word freedom, but I actually know what it means. If you look at our Charter of Rights, there's something called the fundamental freedoms. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of mobility, freedom of association. To use the word freedom, to say freedom from poverty, that's not really what freedom means. When you say I want to be free from poverty, what you actually mean is I want the power to get money from you. It's a misuse of the word freedom. To be free from violence is a good idea, and we call that the right to security of the person. That's what cops are for. But freedom from discrimination of who you love, that's already the case in Canada, where it's been lawful to have gay marriage for about 10 years. This is an abuse of the word freedom. This is as close as Rachel Notley and the NDP ever get to freedom. When they say freedom from poverty, what they really mean is the power to tax the rich to give to their friends. And of course, in Alberta, taxing the rich means most people. I'll get to that later. Here's the next clip from the throne speech.
As its first act, our new government will introduce Bill 1, an act to renew democracy in Alberta. At long last, this act, if passed, will ban corporate and union donations to political parties in this province.
Well, that's not a bad first act. I mean, taking corporate and union money out of politics. I believe that we should be allowed to put our own money into politics. It's a way of making our voice relevant and powerful. I don't mind taking corporations and unions out of it, so I'll give them part marks for that. But it's actually not true that that's their first act as a government. They couldn't help themselves. Their first act of government was to ban menthol-flavored cigarettes, which is so weird and obscure, but it goes to their authoritarian streak, telling people how to live. It's also sort of weird. They're almost an all-white caucus for all their talk of diversity. The NDP and the left are pretty much all-white union bosses these days. And they banned menthol cigarettes, which are the cigarette of choice for African Americans. It's just so obscure and weird. I can see why they didn't mention that in the throne speech. But let's move on. Here's the next clip.
As its second act, our new government will introduce Bill 2, an act to restore fairness to public revenue. This bill will ask those who have benefited the most from the boom times in Alberta to now contribute a little more, so that our schools and healthcare can be spared from chaos and reckless cutbacks.
You see that? Those who have benefited from the boom times should pay a little more so that our schools can be protected now. Well, what this is another way of saying is entrepreneurs in Alberta who are now in a recession, Alberta is in a recession, they should still pay more in taxes so that public sector government workers don't have to face cuts. That's really the translation there, is all you private sector people who are now dealing with $50 oil and a recession and delayed or canceled oil sands plants, you still have to pay more so that Rachel Notley's union friends don't have to take a 5% cut to their already bloated public sector pay. That's the NDP we're going to see a lot more of. Here's the next clip.
Corporate taxes on the largest and most profitable corporations in Alberta will be increased from 10% to 12%. Small business taxes will remain at the current rate, 3%. And progressive income taxes will be reintroduced in Alberta for those earning more than $125,000 a year.
That sounds pretty reasonable, doesn't it? That they're going to raise taxes on the rich in Alberta, defined as those making 125 grand a year or more. Now that would make sense to someone from Toronto, for example, as many of the chiefs of staff of this government are. I've told you before that 10 out of 12 senior staff positions in this government, the chiefs of staff, including Rachel Notley's own chief of staff, are out of province NDP activists commuting in each week from Toronto, Vancouver, wherever. So calling $125,000 a year rich and saying we're going to soak the rich in Alberta probably rings true if you're a socialist in Toronto. But the thing is, in Alberta, $125,000 actually isn't rich. In fact, take Fort McMurray, the city that the NDP loves to hate. The average income in Fort McMurray, according to Statistics Canada, is $186,000. That's average. The average person makes $186,000. It's the hardest working, highest income city in Canada. But if you're Brian Topp, the NDP Chief of Staff from Toronto, or Nathan Rotman, the NDP Finance Chief of Staff from Toronto, or if you're Graham Mitchell, the Energy Minister Chief of Staff from Toronto, you think $125,000 is rich, and you don't really know Alberta. You've actually never been to the oil sands. Rachel Notley declared war on Fort McMurray in this budget, saying that's a rich city, we're going to hike taxes on it. They don't even know this province because they're not from this province. Next clip.
When these changes are implemented, each and every citizen of Alberta will still be contributing by far the lowest provincial taxes in Canada.
Remember what this is. This is a speech from the throne. It's the Queen's delegate. So obviously she's not going to speak in the sharp language of an NDP activist. But there is something we can see here. It's the theme that we can expect from the NDP in the years ahead. Saying, well, yeah, we're taking Albertans down a notch, but we're still a little bit better than other provinces. See, Alberta was once the greatest province in terms of prosperity, entrepreneurialism, freedom. What the NDP is saying, we're going to cut that tall poppy down, but hey, don't you Albertans worry. You're still going to be a little bit wealthier than the rest of Canada. We're just going to take you down a notch or two. See, when the government is run by NDP activists from other provinces who have spent their careers loathing Alberta's specialness and industry, taking Alberta down a notch is their actual goal. It's not a price to pay for another goal. It's not a harsh means to an end. It is the end in itself. The NDP wants Alberta not to be special or amazing or exceptional. They want it to have the same tax burden as everyone else. And Rachel Notley, through the Lieutenant Governor, made it clear. Next clip.
This province needs to demonstrate real leadership on the environment and on climate change.
Now see, if that language talking about a sustainable, responsible Canadian industry that can reach markets, if that was said by an oil and gas worker, I'd know what that means. Let us get some pipelines. But when you say only sustainable energy has a future and you're a New Democrat who is for solar panels and wind turbines, I'm nervous because you notice they didn't actually say oil and gas. They didn't say that. Sustainable energy. I think that to an NDP that means a very different thing than to an Albertan. Don't take my word for it. Here's Brian Topp, Rachel Notley's Chief of Staff, explaining what he thinks about oil, gas, and coal in a speech he gave when he was running for the federal NDP leader. Take a look.
We want a clear approach on climate change, and I quite like what they're doing in Europe, and it's worth studying it carefully as we think about Canadian policy. Hard cap on emissions, to price carbon, a home and industrial retrofit program, getting out of coal, getting an urban mass transit program, and getting fossil-fueled cars out of our cities. The comprehensive approach like that, we can tackle climate change, and it's got to be at the heart of our next government.
Yeah, do you think when he says responsible, sustainable energy, it means the same thing as oil and gas? No, and you heard him there, right there, saying he wants to end coal, which of course is an enormous industry in Alberta. Let me go to the next clip, take a look.
We need to review how the people of Alberta, including our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, many years from now, will be rewarded for the development of their own energy resources. We need to return to a respectful relationship with this land's Indigenous people.
I totally agree that we need a respectful relationship with Alberta's Aboriginal peoples, but who is she talking about that wasn't respectful? Is she saying that Albertans are not respectful to Aboriginal people, that she's saying the oil industry isn't? It's really weird that she jammed that in right under a comment about oil and gas. What's she saying? Is she saying that the Fort McKay Indian Band, which is right in the heart of the oil sands, that has 0% unemployment, that has received over $1 billion worth of oil contracts, that they're not being treated respectfully, that the National Energy Board that approved the Northern Gateway Pipeline, where one of the 3 panelists was a status Indian living on an Indian reserve, that he didn't treat the Aboriginals respectfully. Who exactly is she saying, is implying, has not been treated respectfully? I'd like to know. I mean, maybe there is someone that she wants to correct. Or is this just some blame Alberta, we're all evil? Again, from someone who really doesn't know anything about the oil and gas industry and how it's the #1 employer of Aboriginal people. But then again, when you got Brian Topp writing her throne speech from Toronto, he probably doesn't know any Indians other than watching Dances with Wolves. Here's the next clip.
We need to make sure all Albertans are paid fairly at work, including those on the minimum wage.
You know, only 2% of Albertans earn the minimum wage. It's such a strong economy, even though it's in recession, that most young people pay more than that just to attract talent. But the NDP has their old hobby horses that they're going to force on Alberta no matter what, even if they don't apply, even if Alberta is heading into a recession. The thing is, when you jack up the minimum wage, when people are already laying off folks by the thousand, you just make it harder for someone to get a job in a weak labor market. Who does this serve to jack up the minimum wage? Well, it's obvious. It serves labor unions because it eliminates their lower priced competition. That's who Rachel Notley serves. Her husband is a union boss himself with CUPE. This throne speech is very vague, and perhaps I've read too much negative into it. But when it's written by NDP activists from outside the province who have sworn on a stack of Bibles that their goal is to shut down the oil sands, when the Chief of Staff to the Energy Minister, Graham Mitchell, himself produced anti-oil sands TV ads like this one here, how can we hope for the best when we've already heard from them about their worst plans? Let me close with a clip that wasn't in the throne speech. This is from David Eggen, promoted to cabinet by Rachel Notley. Here's what he has to say about the future of oil and gas approvals. He's the guy making the chants. Take a listen.
Doing the right thing means that we have no new approvals for tar sand projects, and we start to invest money into a renewable energy and into a sustainable economy. No new approvals. No new approvals. No new approvals.
I'll wait for the facts, but from what I've seen so far, the NDP isn't here to run Alberta. They're here to ruin it. For TheRebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.